All right, good evening. Good evening and welcome to our third installment of our class on Worldviews and World Religions. It's great to see all of you here tonight, and especially excited about tonight after the last two on sort of the foundations of biblical apologetics, now to talk a little bit about the application of that to world religions like Islam. So I'm going to open us in a word of prayer, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. White. Heavenly Father, thank you again for the truth that you give us in the Scriptures. As Jesus himself said, your word is truth. It defines truth for us. And as we submit to your truth, Father, we walk in a way that honors you. Lord, as we hear tonight a little bit about how to engage Muslims with the gospel, our prayer would be that our heart would go out to those who are lost and perishing, that we would respond with Christ-like compassion, and that you would equip us to share your truth with those who need it in a way that honors you. Thank you again that Dr. White can be with us this week. We pray that you would be with him now as he instructs us from your word, and we pray this in the name of Christ. Amen.
All right. Well, it is good to be with you again this evening, even though it's dark on that side of the room. So I'm sort of wondering if the people who sat over there are just a little afraid of the light, maybe. I'm not sure. They are on my left, I noticed. So sheep and the goats, but, never know. So the good doctor's going to go over there and shed some light on the subject. There you go. See? Now the sheep have arrived. And notice he's moved sides just to keep me off balance, because he's been over there, and we don't want to be a traditionalist. And I'm an elder in a Reformed Baptist church, and we may not have names on the pews, but they're there anyway. Yeah. You know how that works. Anyway, so yes, this evening we need to, I was thinking we only have 3 nights left, and I'm sitting there going, I'm supposed to cover that. Oh boy, we need to stop telling so many stories and sort of pick up the pace a little bit. But I wanted to start off with something I did that was rather controversial. And that was early last year. I did a series of dialogues with this gentleman, Dr. Yasser Qadhi. I had been introduced to Dr. Qadhi by Shabir Ali, who was the first Muslim scholar that I debated formally at Biola University in 2006. And somehow Shabir had put us together. And so Dr. Qadhi, who is the head of the Al-Maghrib Institute, which is the largest Sunni Muslim educational institute in the United States, sent me a 16-volume, 16-CD series called Light and Guidance. And so I converted those to MP3 files, put them on my iPod, and went for bike rides. That's how I study stuff like that. And so after listening to it a couple of times, and man, I learned some fascinating things. First of all, his Arabic was wonderful. I was studying Arabic at the time, and his pronunciation of key terms and things like that. He's a Hafiz, he's the one I mentioned to you, said, that surah, right-hand side corner page in the Quran. That's Dr. Qadhi right there. I started contacting him with questions, and he was very gracious to respond to the questions. I think he even says in the introduction that I won't play for you here, but he even says he was just amazed to encounter a Christian that was actually listening to what they believed and trying to understand it and using Arabic terminology. And he just figured I'd take the CDs and stick them on my shelf and never do anything with them rather than actually listening to them. That led over the years, a few times he contacted me once he was going to some ecumenical thing. And he goes, so could you help me out here? What's the difference between a Presbyterian and a Lutheran? And, when you think about it, we look over toward them, and it's like all the different kinds of Sunni and Shia and Ahmadi, and there's all these different terms, and we don't know much. So why is one group blowing up the other group and stuff like that? Seems very, very confusing. It looks pretty confusing looking the other direction, too, from his background. And he wanted to know, he was going to be talking with the Presbyterian and Lutherans, so what's the difference between them? And that's not easy to explain to a Muslim imam, how do you express the differences between Lutheranism and Presbyterianism? But so we had some back and forth. So I learned a lot from him because I was willing to listen, especially on the subject of shirk, which is a subject I will be saying a lot about to you this evening, which is the one unforgivable sin in Islam. If you die as a mushrik, there is no hope for you whatsoever. And it's one of the key issues in evangelizing Muslims is the vast majority of Muslims around the world believe that we are inviting them to commit shirk. And if shirk is the one sin that when you die, God cannot possibly forgive it, then that's a huge barrier to the gospel, which means we have to be sensitive to that and have to know how to explain that we're not inviting them to commit shirk, but you have to understand what it is first to be able to do that. So, I sort of think being able to get over gospel barriers is really, really, really important. And so that's one of the reasons that I will listen. And one of the things I really enjoyed in listening to Yasir Qadhi is I would listen to Yasir Qadhi lecturing to Muslims. He doesn't, until me, he didn't really have a whole lot of interest in dialoguing with Christians. He says that's the reason he won't debate me is he says, look, I don't know anything about Christianity other than what I've learned from you. You obviously know a bunch about my faith, and you're an expert in your own faith, and so it would be sort of suicidal for me to try to take you on in a debate because you have all the advantages. And so he's just straightforward about that. I learned a tremendous amount about shirk. Also, hadith. I'll be talking to you about the hadith. He's an expert in hadith. One of the stories he tells in this introduction is I have a clear recollection of in Phoenix, where I live, if you want to get a long bike ride in during August, you have to get up about 2 o'clock in the morning. Seriously. And get started by about 2:30. Because if you've ever been to Phoenix or Palm Springs or whatever it out there, you've got the similar situation out there. You've got about an hour after the sun gets up before you start seeing pink elephants dancing by in tutus. And so you got to get in and get done by that time. So you got to get started really early. And during the monsoon in Phoenix, it just doesn't cool down. We will have some nights in August where it'll be 93, 94 at sunrise. That's the coolest it'll get. And a humid 93, 94. Don't believe the lie that it's always a dry heat in Phoenix. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. Not starting the second week of July. So I have clear recollection of one early morning, probably 3 o'clock in the morning, stopped at a stoplight on my bike at Union Hills, northbound on 16th Street. And I'm listening to Yasir Qadhi giving his lectures on hadith sciences. And I even remember exactly where he was. There were 5 rules he was giving in regards to determination of what Sahih hadith are. And he was on between number 2 and 3. And I don't know why I remember that. My mind just works that way. I can remember stuff like that. I can remember where I've heard hadith while riding with incredible clarity. But when I go to Target, I have to call my wife and go, why am I here again? It's just, what was I supposed to get? I remember 1 or 2 things, but it's just sad how the brain goes over time. So I had told about it. He told, we're in, this is his mosque. This is his people and Christians are sitting out in front of us here. And he's already told this story. And he says, I can't get my own students to listen to me as well as this guy does. And he's told this to his people. So I want you to hear the first question that he asks me and the way that he asks it. And then tell you a second story behind it, sort of as an introduction this evening.
So, Reverend James White is a breath of fresh air for us. We appreciate his candidness and honesty, and that's why it's such an honor and a pleasure to have him here at the Memphis Islamic Center. So, I want to just start off by asking some very, very generic questions that I know are on the minds of many Muslims. And I know that they've never really had somebody explain to them with the amount of knowledge you have of the Islamic faith, explain to them in a way that they can understand.
Well, first I've got to ask you,
is
this the first time there's ever been a bow tie in here? Do you think it probably is?
then I'm proud of myself. That's
It is
good,
indeed. It is indeed the first time there's been a bow tie over here. Yes. It's very rare to meet somebody like this wearing a bow tie.
My wife says the same thing. So
So I want to ask you a question that is on the minds of many, many Muslims.
Okay, I want you to think. Now, you know I'm going to answer it, but I want you to think. If you were asked this question, how would you respond to it? What would be the categories that you would engage in, especially for the seminary students? How would you respond to this question?
And even yesterday I got the same question as well. Like, can you ask him to explain this concept? The average Muslim is struggling to understand the Christian doctrine of Trinity and how it is viewed as being monotheistic. Because again, this is something that is not comprehensible to the average Muslim mind.
Okay. So, you say you're a monotheist. You say you believe there's only one God, but you believe in this thing called the Trinity. So how do you explain that? Here's a guy, he's got a PhD from Yale, but there's obviously something major in the way of him coming to understand what we believe about the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, it's tradition. It's a misrepresentation of the Trinity within the Quran. There's all sorts of things. But he's not going to debate with me. He's going to let me just answer the question. The next question he'll ask me is, why did a part of God have to die? Why did a part of God have to die? So just think of all the things that are running through my mind right now in trying to formulate my words in such a way as to communicate with a primarily Muslim audience, but a primarily American. This is Memphis, Tennessee. A primarily American Muslim audience, which is going to be different than if I'm in South Africa. It's going to be different than if I'm in a majority Muslim country, et cetera, et cetera. These are the things you have to be thinking about. Now, doing these, we did 2 nights of dialogues, and it was very controversial. And I understand there might be people even tonight that would disagree with having this kind of dialogue. Debate, okay, that's one thing, but dialogue where it's not equal time and stuff like that. And I've been around the gum stump on this, been attacked vociferously by certain people for having done this, and especially the fact that we did it in a very respectful manner. There wasn't any blood left on the floor and that kind of thing. But here's what a lot of people don't know, is that after this evening, after this dialogue in the mosque, the first night at one of the local churches when we did this, I'll go ahead and, let me see here. There we go. Oh, yeah, that's in Safari anyways. After he and I had our dialogue at the church provided refreshments, and what was fascinating to me is in my debates, normally after the debate takes place, what happens is the Christians gather over on their side, and they're talking about how they won the debate, and the Muslims gather over on their side, and they're talking about how they won the debate. And what happened that night was all the Muslims and the Christians got together and were talking with each other about what had just been discussed. So the conversation kept going. And I had never seen it happen before. And I had 3 Muslim men come up to me as they were leaving, and they thanked me for the evening. And I said to them, gentlemen, could I just ask you, did you feel welcomed here this evening? And the older one in the center, his eyes teared up. And he said, I didn't think this was possible. I did not think this was possible. Here were Muslims that had no idea that there were Christians in Memphis that would actually talk with them as human beings, even though there was clear disagreement. And Dr. Qadi and I had talked about, I talked about what I wanted for him, what he wanted for me. And so we were very open about our differences. This was not a kumbaya moment. We believe different things. If he's right, I'm wrong. If I'm right, he's wrong. We both may be wrong, but we both can't be right. There was no compromise or anything like that at all. And so they were just amazed. But after the night at the mosque, they had refreshments, And I'm standing there drawing down one of those big, huge chocolate chip cookies, those really good ones, not the little wimpy ones or the really ones that are really crunchy, but the nice, real chocolate chips in it, And this beautiful young lady comes up to me, and she's in full hijab, embroidered. It's really beautiful. And she comes up and she says, thank you very, very much for being here. That was fascinating. Could I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. Now, put yourself in my position. Ask yourself what you'd say. She says, this is exactly what she said. I've memorized it. I'll never forget it. How do you handle the influence of pagan religion on the development of the Trinity at the Council of Nicaea? Now, I love that question because I've taught church history forever, and I've got an article still available online that was in the CRI Journal years ago called What Really Happened at the Council of Nicaea. And so I knew what she had heard. I knew she had heard what she had heard about Constantine and stuff like that. And so for 10 minutes, I'm going on about what Constantine's role really was. I take her all the way back to Ignatius of Antioch. And, there's just some incredible quotations, like in his letter to the church at Ephesus about how Jesus is of flesh and of spirit, generate and ingenerate, God and man, true life and death, Son of Mary, Son of God, Jesus Christ our Lord. And 10 times he identifies Jesus as God. And she's just drinking all this stuff in. And I'm telling you, that kind of conversation could not have happened if there had not been a respectful, non-compromising dialogue between two men who clearly have very different beliefs, but can discuss it without hating each other in the process. When those videos came online, I was absolutely vilified by many, many Christians. But you know what? Overseas, especially in Muslim countries, there is absolute rejoicing. What an opportunity. I can't believe you got to go into a mosque and to explain why Jesus had to die and what the gospel is and what the Trinity is. And all they could see was what they don't get to do. And from their perspective, get the gospel out there. It's the power of God unto salvation. Just get it out there. What an incredible opportunity this is. In the U.S., it was like, but overseas, it was like, oh, that's awesome. I had a friend who has a radio program, and he got someone who actually ministers in Iraq. And without knowing what he was going to say, interviewed on his program and said, I asked you to watch these dialogues and to give me your honest opinion. You're a person who lives in a very difficult and dangerous situation in Iraq. He lives in Mosul. Some of you know what that means. How many times have we taken Mosul and then lost Mosul and then retaken Mosul and so on and so forth? And his reaction was, that was one of the most encouraging things I've ever seen. And so as I dive into this, I simply have to say my greatest desire for you is that you examine your heart as a Christian and simply ask God, am I so afraid of Muslims that I will never be able to be used to reach one? Or do I have such prejudice in my heart because of what I've seen that I will never open my mouth in any other way than pure condemnation? We are not making much of an impact upon the Muslim community in the United States. We're just not. And the reason is, even sound, loving, Bible-based Christians know most of what they know about Islam from Fox News rather than from meaningful Christian theological sources. And that's better than MSNBC, but it's still not where we should be getting our information. And we are afraid. And when you're fearful, when you're afraid of people, we all know when we witness to people, there's sort of that half a second where if you take the opportunity, you're going to be able to open up a conversation. But there's that half a second, and if you let it pass, it passes. If you're fearful, you'll delay that half second, and very often the opportunity will be lost and will pass. Almost every time I get into a cab, I end up with a Muslim driver, especially overseas. But even here in the United States, I very rarely take cabs. But when I have, man, I've had incredible conversations. But it's because I'm not afraid of that person. I don't have fear of that person. And that fear can come from two different directions. That fear can come from a physical fear of a physical confrontation because you've watched TV. I mean, I was at Heathrow last year when that guy drove the van across the bridge and ran people over and then jumped out and started stabbing people and everything else. I was at Heathrow when that happened. And only a few days earlier, I had run that bridge early in the morning. Now, they're never going to do it early in the morning because let me tell you something. Londoners are not early morning people. I mean, seriously. Right there at Big Ben where the eye is and stuff like that, if you get up right at sunrise, it's all yours. There ain't nobody there. I have run that circuit without even having to compete with other joggers. I can't tell you. London does not wake up till about 7 o'clock in the morning, and then it's like, vroom, there's everybody. You can't get anywhere. You're walking like this sideways around people. You can't run or anything. But I had been there. And so you see that, and you think about the violence, and, I don't want that to happen to me. And this person might be like that. So you have that kind of fear. Or if you realize that, well, the chances are this guy is not a jihadi if he's driving a taxi cab in the U.S. right now. He's probably just trying to make ends meet and keep his kids clothed and stuff like that. But I'm afraid I'm going to say something that I'm not going to be able to defend, or it's going to be unnecessarily offensive, or I'm afraid out of ignorance. Whatever the source of fear is, it stops us dead in our tracks. And that's why so many of those people that I spoke to there in Memphis, they were just stunned. Because Dr. Cotty said to me, he said, James, I can get the liberal Christians to talk to me anytime. But it's the conservatives who will not touch me with a 10-foot pole. And see, he knows the liberals don't really believe anything. He knows that the people that are the closest to him who actually believe something are conservatives, but they won't even give him the time of day. Shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Now, I was raised, my introduction to Islam was sort of between 9/11 and that one year that the Houston Rockets were in the NBA final, and Hakeem Olajuwon couldn't drink water during Ramadan. Remember that? Nobody remembers that. Wow. Okay, I remember that. There was a time when the Houston Rockets, Hakeem Olajuwon, observant Muslim, the finals were during Ramadan. And so when the games were during the day, he could not drink water. So he's their main man. And by the fourth quarter, if you ain't drinking water, you ain't doing so good, So those were sort of the two introductions I had to Islam. So I had no idea. I had no earthly idea where they were coming from. There's not a lot of really good information out there. And even when you do find websites and things like that, exercise extreme caution. Because I've found few subjects that produce more bias and bigotry on the part of people who name the name of Christ than the subject of Islam. It's just amazing. Now, you need to have an accurate knowledge of what is believed, because we've already said we're servants of Christ. He is the truth. Therefore, if we are going to engage any group, we need to do so with the highest standard of integrity and with the ultimate desire to be the conduit through which God mercifully introduces this person or this group to the true Jesus. They've been given a false Jesus. There are many Muslims who will tell you we're the second largest religion in the world that teaches people to love Jesus. That sounds really good, but it's not true. The Jesus of the Quran is not the Jesus of the New Testament. And 99.999% of Muslims have no idea who the real Jesus is. They have a mere prophet named Jesus. But the vast majority of them have never read the New Testament. That's why if you can get them to read almost anything in the New Testament, it is a huge, huge victory. It's a major, major first step. That's something you really want to be able to try to do. So I want to give you foundational understanding of where primarily Sunni Islam is coming from. Shiite, the Sunnis are between 85 and 90% of the world's Muslims. The Shiites between 8 and 10% of the world's Muslims. So you've got a much greater chance of talking to a Sunni than a Shiite, but they're out there. And they're especially well known because they sit on a larger proportion of the world's oil than their numbers would represent. And so they have a lot of political power. And much of what you see going on in the Middle East right now, much of the Muslim-on-Muslim violence in Syria today, the horrific humanitarian disaster that is Syria today, is due to the political dynamics of the Sunnis versus the Shia. When you understand that, you start seeing who's on what side. And you start getting a little bit more of an understanding of why Saudi Arabia does what Saudi Arabia does versus what Iran does, and then all the players in the middle, and how Iraq and Iran had been at war, Sunnis versus Shia, and it starts making some sense at that point when you understand something about the historical division between those two groups, which can be incredibly nasty. I mean, you've heard about the bombings, but if you ever listen to some of the prayers that Sunni clerics will pray about Shiites, praying that they'll develop the worst forms of slow-dying liver cancer and so on and so forth. I mean, just horrific, imprecatory type stuff. There is a tremendous amount of animosity there. There's more animosity there than they have toward Christians, without any question. You're always more angry with the person who's closest to you in belief that differs from you than you are somebody that's way, way out there someplace. If for no other reason than it gives you a whole lot clearer understanding of what in the world's going on in the news, this will be helpful to you, but that's not why I do it. We've seen, and we don't, a lot of people like to trumpet their converts. I have always felt that that's something you should leave for the throne of God in eternity. And especially in this situation. And the older I get, the more I go, leave that poor convert alone. Get him in a church, get him grounded. Don't put him up on a pedestal. I've seen too many converts thrown out in front of the cameras too early and destroyed as a result. And what's more, and when it's an Islamic convert, give them their space. They've got enough to be dealing with. They don't need your throwing them out there as if they're some trophy or something. But those Muslims that I know of that our ministry has touched, just a tremendous encouragement to me. It takes a lot of time. Many of our missionaries labor for years for a single convert in these lands, but it's important. It's necessary that we do this kind of work. They're precious people, and it's exciting to get to see them. So let's get started. You need to understand the 5 pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam. There will be a quiz at the end of the evening. We have the basketball team is staying outside. They will not let you out of the room until you pass the test. And so make sure you're taking good notes. We did arrange that, right? He says, yeah. So I said, there you go. I figured that was taken care of. The 5 pillars of Islam. The first pillar is absolutely foundational to an understanding of why Muslims struggle so much with our beliefs and with our faith. It is the central, if the central aspect of the Christian faith is the Trinity, then the central aspect of the Islamic faith is Tawheed, Tawheed, Tawheed. Now, before anyone complains, there's going to be a lot of Arabic used. And guess why? Because that's how Muslims speak. Only about 16% of the world's Muslims are Arabic. The largest Islamic country in the world is Indonesia. They're not Arabic. And so the vast majority of Muslims cannot read the Quran in its original language. But if you go to Indonesia and they talk about the oneness of God, they will talk about Tawheed. And they will talk about the denial of that being shirk. And they will use all the Arabic terminology. When they talk about a commentary of the Quran, it's tafsir. It's all Arabic. You can't. I was speaking at a church in Boulder a few years ago, giving this presentation actually, and in fact, one of the first times I ever gave this presentation was in chapel here, like about 2007. So it's expanded a good bit since then, especially the videos. But I actually made up this, like this screen was for chapel right here. But I was speaking at a church in Boulder, and I made reference to the sort of the preeminence of Arabic in Islamic theology. Well, afterwards, a Muslim came up to me and he says, I'm not really sure exactly how, central Arabic really is. It wasn't one of his main objections. We started talking about other stuff. About a half hour in, I stopped him and I said, by the way, have you noticed how many Arabic terms you and I have used that our brothers, our friends here have no idea what we were talking about? But you and I used them because it was the only way to talk about what we were talking about? He sort of goes, okay, point taken. He had never even thought about how central Arabic is in that way. Given that the Muslim believes that the Quran is an uncreated thing, it's as eternal as Allah. Allah did not create the Quran. This is only in Sunni. The Shiites don't believe this. And this is a belief that developed over time. But the Quran is uncreated. It exists on a heavenly tablet in Arabic. In Arabic. So Arabic truly is, in the mind of the believing Muslim, the heavenly language because the Quran is written in it. So we will encounter a lot of Arabic terminology, such as Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. There is only one God. The Shahada is the confession, the profession that there is only one true God, Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And you become a Muslim by saying the Shahada. Now, how many of you have ever seen a person become a Muslim? About 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere along the line. You have to say the Shahada in the presence of witnesses, but you have to say it in Arabic. You cannot make your profession of faith in English. You cannot make your profession of faith in German or Spanish or Italian or anything else. It has to be in Arabic. So if they have to walk you through it syllable by syllable, it still has to be done in Arabic, which has fascinating ramifications when you think about it. So I have a clip that I like to play for folks that shows people becoming Muslims. And what I like about this particular clip is, it is in English that is fully understandable because the speaker is from Brooklyn, New York. So instead of having someone with a thick foreign accent that might be difficult for people to understand, this guy could go on TBN and get away with it. He really could. He's a very expressive speaker, very clear, very understandable. His name is Khalid Yassin. And this was a presentation he gave down in Sydney, Australia, not all that long ago. I think it was about 2010, something along those lines, maybe 2008. And so this is in a Western context that he is doing this, and he's bringing people into Islam. He has given a couple days worth of lectures, primarily against Christianity, that were horrifically bad. I mean, the factual misinformation was stunning. The things that he said about Nicaea and stuff like that were just utterly in error. But at the end of that, you have basically what we would identify as an Islamic altar call. Now, I want you to watch this altar call, and I want you to be thinking, especially the seminary students, but everybody, about the parallels from what we have seen in our own experience, as well as the differences. The parallels as well as the differences, okay? And then we'll discuss it on the far side. So here we go.
Can you stand for me quickly? Just stand for me. Come right here, please. I want to make this transition or this transaction, because this is what it is. These are human beings that's making a transaction with God. They're not making a transaction for us. They're making a transaction with God and a transition in their lives. So I want to make this easy for them. We have a gift for them, and we're going to give them this gift. Now, the gift that we're giving to them is something that will help them on their way. One, it's a copy of the Quran with the transliteration of the meanings. Secondly, it's a short, easy to read, authentic biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. Thirdly, it is a set of 7 books. It is a set of 7 books that have in it lessons for new Muslims. Now, your acceptance of Islam is your acceptance of God, not your acceptance of me, or not your acceptance of these people, nor your acceptance of the political dynamics in the world, because it has nothing to do with that. It's just your acceptance of God. And this gift is to help you make that transition. I want you to say with me the simple words. And these words are nothing more than what I have explained. There's no trick, no curve, and we don't have a pool in the back for you to dip in. But let's say the words. Let's just go over the words called the Shahada, the bearing of witness. And I'll tell you what it is. Essentially, it is the saying of that there's none to be worshipped except Almighty God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Saying that word and then adding to it, I testify, or I declare, or I announce that there's none to be worshipped except Almighty God, and that I testify, or I declare, or I announce that Muhammad is the messenger of God, brings you or into the transition of Islam. From that point, it's your sincerity, it's your acts of worship, it is your commitment that will make the difference. Now, whatever you owe God of something you did that only you know and God knows, after tonight, your board is clear. Because God is the forgiver of those that come back to him. But whatever you owe somebody, money, rent, a loan, you still owe that. Is that fair? Okay, please, just say after me the words, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Amen.
And that is how you become a Muslim. I'm sorry?
Without repenting.
Without what?
Without repenting from their sins.
There was no specific reference to repentance, that's true, but there was the reference to forgiveness of your sins up until that particular point. And then after that, it's your acts of sincerity and your worship that gets you going. But so the things that were similar, you clearly have the audience very much encouraging people to come forward. Allahu Akbar is God is greatest. That's Takbir, Allahu Akbar. I've had that happen during a couple of my debates. I had some young, sort of radical young guys that were getting excited during one of my debates in London whenever my opponent was speaking, Adnan Rashid. And so I made a particularly strong point against Adnan's position. They were perfectly quiet. And the front row was like this far away. I just looked at him and said, "What, I don't get to talk beer for that?" And they're all sort of like... So someone goes, "Talk beer, Allahu Akbar." So, okay. So they didn't know what to do with someone that would do that. But anyway, so you have the similarities there. Then you have... someone comes down front, we give them a Bible, we'll give them discipleship materials, same type of things being done there. It's done in public, so you have public invitations that are given, instructions given to people, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of things that look somewhat similar. But then where were some of the differences? Well, I've not seen too many Christian ministers wearing 7th century Arabic garb. They're still wearing the same type of clothing that Muhammad would have worn. You heard the reference that we don't have a pool for you to dip in. I think some of you caught that. But then the most important thing to me is the fact that he had to lead them through saying, "La ilaha illallah wa Muhammadan Rasulullah," which you can understand why you have to do that. There's a lot of la-la-las in there. Now, if any of you are worried, "Oh no, James White just became a Muslim." No. I have said the Shahada many, 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 many times in Arabic, and there is no serious Muslim on the planet that would go, "See, you're a Muslim now." No. Because there are at least 7 conditions that Islamic scholarship has recognized over the years that are necessary for saying a true Shahada, which includes believing what you're saying, which I don't. Therefore, I'm not saying the Shahada with any type of meaningfulness to it. But to say, "La ilaha illallah wa Muhammadan Rasulullah," you had to do it in Arabic. You had to be led through it syllable by syllable. Now, I always ask, and since we've got seminary students here, I'm going to be watching very, very carefully. But is there anyone in this room that made their profession of faith in either biblical Hebrew or Koine Greek? I normally have some type of smart aleck sophomore seminary student. No, you didn't. Either that or you haven't been saved yet, and we need to talk. So... But we don't do that. I've never had anybody say, "Yeah, that's how I had to do it too." No. We made our profession of faith in our mother tongue. Why? Because we have Acts chapter 15 and they don't. What's Acts chapter 15? The Jerusalem Council. And what's decided in Acts chapter 15? Well, there were some Jews that believed you had to become a Jew before you could become a Christian. You had to go into the Old Covenant before you could be a part of the New Covenant. And the apostles gathered together, Peter, James, and they decide what? No, you do not have to become a Jew. You don't have to enter into the Old Covenant to be a part of the New Covenant. You don't have to be a Jewish person to become a Christian first. And so the gospel can go across any border, any language, and speak to any people. And we don't have to worry about what language it's in. We don't have to be doing everything in biblical Hebrew or anything along those lines. Because we have Acts chapter 15, they don't. And this is what's bringing so much of the stress and strain, is that Islam is a religio-political system or a political-religious system, depending on the percentage of the population that is Islamic. So in other words, when you have a small, tiny fraction, as it is in the United States, then the emphasis is upon the religious aspect. But as it grows, then the emphasis upon the political increases. Now, it's not that it's not ever, it can never be separated, because we've all heard the dreaded phrase Sharia. Sharia law. Now, the reality is there's all sorts of different understandings of Sharia within Islam. That's one of the reasons there's arguments between the various schools of jurisprudence. Just like amongst Christians. It's sort of like when you say the law of God, you think there might be some disputes amongst Christians as to exactly what that might mean. Well, you got the ceremonial law, and you've got the moral law, and you've got all this other kind of stuff. And so we have arguments about that rather frequently amongst ourselves, as the Muslims do about Sharia. But Sharia is definitional to Islam. And so when you bring it into another culture, it's automatically going to create tremendous stresses and strains, and that's what we're seeing in Europe, especially today, with the influx of Muslims into that area. So anyway, just some of the differences that you see between that conversion experience and what you would have in regards to the Christian faith. I think it's important that you understand that. But especially the Shahada, if this is definitional, then Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, Unitarian monotheism. Unitarian monotheism. We are monotheists, but we are Trinitarians. They are Unitarian monotheists. This is definitional in the Muslim mind. Then you have the Salat, the prayers. In some places in the world, you don't even ask, are you a Muslim? You say, do you say the prayers? And if you've traveled to Muslim-majority countries, then hearing the adhan, the calling to prayer from the minaret is just a part of the life. And if it's an observant area, everything shuts down. And, you got people in the streets on their rugs facing toward Mecca saying the prayers. This is something that is not uncommon to see in those countries. And they occur at different times. The Fajr prayer during the summer can be extremely early, especially when you go way, way up north into like Norwegian countries. The Fajr prayer can be at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is, good luck getting almost anybody up to say prayers at that time. But here's a quick description of prayer.
In Mecca is a necessary precondition of performance of prayer. Muslims believe that the Kaaba is the first house built to glorify and worship the one God by the prophet Abraham. Muslims from all over the world, whether they are in the east or west, north or south, turn their faces toward the Kaaba at the prayer time. If a person is in a place such as a desert, jungle, a strange town, or a place where he is...
Now, as you can tell by the super high resolution, this is a VHS tape. This is a Muslim tape. This is a Muslim tape for Muslims, so it's not for Christians or something like that. But you can tell, especially by what's about to be said, that you can sort of guess where the Kaaba might be. Every Muslim today has... Okay, who stole my phone? It's probably back here. There we go. Every Muslim today, I even have one, has a program on their smartphone. It's a Qibla program. The Qibla is the direction toward Mecca. And so you don't have to worry about just guessing anymore. You can just simply use your phone.
Unable to find out the direction from others, then he is allowed to use his own judgment and offers his prayers facing in any direction that he thinks the Qibla could be. Nowadays, a compass is available, which gives the direction of the Qibla from anywhere in the world. The person now makes the niyyah, or intention in his mind, more specific, relative to whatever prayer he is ready to perform. Again, the niyyah does not have to be expressed aloud.
Now, these prayers, however, are done in Arabic. They're not done in your native tongue. The formal prayers. When you're praying in your mind beforehand, you can pray in your own language. But the actual prayers, as you will see here in a moment, are done in Arabic. And they're prescribed prayers. Oh, drat. Sorry about that.
Facing towards the now
there.
Not have to be expressed aloud. Now that we have gone through the preliminaries for offering the prayer or salat, we are about to commence the act by declaring the niyyah. Demonstrates the required number of rakats or units in each prayer. Fajr is from dawn to sunrise. The number of rakats are 2 sunnah, 2 fard.
Now watch.
Allahu Akbar.
Now watch where the woman is. Okay. So if you ever go to a mosque, and I've taken a number of my classes, seminary classes and stuff, to mosques to observe the prayers and then talk with the imam afterwards. In fact, I have a picture of the mosque. The first mosque I debated inside the mosque, not a building associated with it, was the Abu Bakr Siddiq Mosque in Erasmia, Pretoria, South Africa. And the women's area for prayer is actually on the second floor, but it's open to where the imam is. So they're actually above where the men are, but back behind. So they're actually not with the men. In most of the mosques that are not that big or not that fancy, the women are at the back of the room or behind the divider. But they're always behind the men, and this is by direct commandment of Muhammad found in the Hadith. Even the way of holding the right hand over the left that you're going to see, notice both of them are doing the same, even which hand's on top of which hand, all of that is prescribed. The sources are extremely specific. The washings, the ablutions called wudu that you do before this, what hand starts what, everything is absolutely prescribed. There's no variation really allowed at that point. Now, what he's quoting is called Surah Al-Fatiha. It is the opening surah of the Quran. We'll talk more about the Quran in a moment. But the Quran is made up of 114 chapters. The first chapter is 7 verses and it's an opening prayer. That's what he's quoting. Then it's organized by length from that point on. So the second surah is the longest, third is a little bit shorter, fourth is a little bit shorter, until you get to the 114th, which is the shortest. So he's quoting. So what this means is Surah Al-Fatiha is well known to every observant Muslim. In fact, I have a video on my YouTube channel from years ago when my Arabic tutor, who was a Syrian-born Christian minister, he and I were discussing another issue. It was the Ergen Cantor debacle and Ergen Cantor's faux Arabic. But he quoted, my Christian tutor quoted Surah Al-Fatiha from memory, though he'd never been a Muslim. Because if you live in Syria, you will have heard it so often that you can't not know it. Because it's just part of the public conscience. You just hear it around you all the time.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim.
And notice, it's only the man that is audibly, they're always going to be led by a man, not a woman.
مالك يوم الدين
owner of the day of judgment.
إياك نعبد
Thee alone we worship. Thee alone we ask for help.
اهدنا
Show us
الصراط
the straight path,
المستقيم
and listen,
صراط
path of those whom thou hast
الذين
favored.
أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب
not the path of those who earn thy anger, nor of those who go astray. Now, when you hear him end the prayer, you're going to hear him say, Valadhalim. Hear it.
المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Okay, did you catch that? Now, why is that relevant? Because in the early literature, Muhammad was asked, who are those who earn Allah's anger and who are those who are led astray? And his answer was that those who earn Allah's anger are the Jews, and those who are led astray are the Christians. Now, we're going to see that in the Quran when we look at the texts that directly address us. But likewise, what that means is the observant Muslim is praying every day of their life not to be you. So it's important to keep track of the barriers that naturally exist due to the fact that Islam is a religion that comes after Christianity. Muhammad dies in 632, according to the Islamic sources. I realize that there are people that question even the existence of Muhammad. But from the Islamic perspective, Muhammad dies in 632. The first revelations of the Quran are given in 610. So you're talking over half a millennium after the close of the canon of the New Testament. And so Islam has to deal with us. And in fact, the Quran teaches that Muslims worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, Abraham primarily, not so much Isaac. Abraham and Ishmael. But that's the same God. And that Jesus was a great prophet of Allah. And so that's part of the reality of their faith. It can either be a huge barrier if we don't understand it, or, in my opinion, it's actually one of the greatest arguments against Islam. Because the author of the Quran did not understand Christianity correctly. Now, even if Christianity was wrong, Allah knew what it was and could accurately represent it. So if the author of the Quran does not accurately represent Christianity, the author of the Quran cannot be Allah. And if Allah does not give the Quran, then Islam is not true, period. That's the end of it. So this is I think, an important thing to keep in mind. By the way, in case you're wondering, why do you say the author of the Quran and not Muhammad? I do that primarily for two reasons. First of all, there are questions concerning the original compilation, origin, authorship of the materials of what we know as the Quran. So there may have been a man named Muhammad that was the primary reciter of these things. I'm trying not to get into that argument every time I'm talking to a Muslim because I may want to be going other directions. But mainly the reason I do that is to keep the temperature of the conversation from reaching the boiling point almost immediately. Because there is such an immediate connection to and defense of Muhammad as an individual and as a prophet, that to bring any type of criticism against him personally frequently stops the conversation before you can communicate any element of truth that they can then take with them and think upon at a later point. And so by saying the author of the Quran, now in the Muslim mind, Muhammad's not the author of the Quran. That's another reason to use it in this way. In the Muslim mind, Muhammad's absolutely positively nothing more than an MP3 player. It really isn't. According to Islamic teaching, the Quran is sent down to the angel Gabriel, who then piecemeals it out to Muhammad between 610 and 632, over a course of 22 years. What Muhammad understood or believed or anything is irrelevant because none of it comes from Muhammad. There is no element even of his grammar in the Quran from the Islamic perspective, from the Orthodox Sunni Islamic perspective. You'll run into liberalized Muslims in the West that have slightly different views maybe, but they're pretty rare. They're pretty rare. So in this prayer, the Muslim is praying not to be a Christian. You got to keep that in mind. Whenever you hear that final line, Wala dhalim, the ones who have been led astray. So those are the prayers. Then we have fasting, the month of Ramadan, which is ending as we are speaking. I'm not sure which night it is. Two more days? So today's 26. Okay, so tomorrow night then might be Laylat al-Qadr. Or last night might have been Laylat al-Qadr. It's well, Laylat al-Qadr can either be the 21st, 23rd, 25th, or 27th. So it's one of the odd numbered nights of the last week. So what that means is last night, your observant Muslim friend was probably up all night praying. And might have done that 2 nights before that and 2 nights before that. Because the idea is that Ramadan is special. Now realize, the Muslims use a lunar calendar. They don't use a solar calendar. So their year moves forward in our year 10 days each year. Because there's a difference between the solar calendar and the lunar calendar. And so what that means is that the month of Ramadan will eventually be during the winter. That'll be a whole lot easier on the Muslim people. When it's during the summer, it's really rough. Because you are not to eat or drink basically during the daylight hours. When that's during the summer, that's a long, long time. We're including water. A couple of years ago in Pakistan, they had a huge heat wave at the end of June. And Muslim clerics had to go on television and say, break the fast, drink water, because over 4,000 people had already died keeping the fast. So the summer months, when the Ramadan's during the summer, it's tough. January, not so much. Nice short days. But the summer months are really, really tough. And so the belief is that the Quran was sent down by Allah to Jibreel in the month of Ramadan. And the night in which it was sent down was called Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. Now, if you pray on the night of power, your prayers have thousands of times the power and blessing of any other night of the year. The problem is the Muslims don't know exactly when Laylat al-Qadr is. Laylat al-Qadr is, Muhammad had something about odd numbers. For example, he would only eat an odd number of dates. You're supposed to use an odd number of stones to cleanse yourself after you go to the bathroom. And, no, I'm telling you the truth. You can read the hadith for yourself. And the night of power is either the 21st, 23rd, 25th, or 27th. Some even have 19th, but majority would say one of those 4 nights at the end of the month of Ramadan. And so almost every mosque in this area will be open all night. Last night, and then tomorrow night will be the 27th. One of those nights is Laylat al-Qadr. So if you do all of them, you nailed Laylat al-Qadr somewhere along the lines. Now, Muhammad knew which night it was. Allah revealed it to him. He came out to tell the people, and the people were arguing with themselves, and because they argued themselves, Muhammad became angry and forgot when Laylat al-Qadr was. And so that's why you have to do it over those 4 nights, because people were arguing with each other, and therefore you shouldn't argue with each other, but you still got to do Laylat al-Qadr in that way. So that is the period of fasting. Now, just in passing, there have been a number of studies that have documented that Muslims take in far more calories during Ramadan than any other month of the year. Because you can't eat till night, and so you spend all night eating. and sort of hard to get much exercise done during the day. So it's a challenging thing. But that is the month of fasting, the month of Ramadan. The giving of zakat, almsgiving, just very, very quickly, it's 2.5% of anything you in your possession for more than a year. There's all sorts of questions and debates today about how you give that in light of the fact there's no Islamic caliphate and true Islamic states and things like that, but we'll not go into that. And finally, Hajj, the pilgrimage. Might be a few people in the room old enough to remember Johnny Quest, I like that. I saw a few people. Yeah, we're all the old people. Don't shake your head too much because it might throw the neck out. But Johnny Quest had a friend named Haji, and he had his little turban on. And a Haji is a person who has gone on Hajj to Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And here is a description of Hajj, if we're ready for the audio.
Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca is compulsory for all Muslims in good health and with sufficient funds to make the journey.
That again is the Kaaba.
The Hajj is the foremost of all Muslim rituals, even if less than 10% of all Muslims ever manage to complete it. The Hajj's importance lies in its allowing the believer to approach the center of the world, as well as the place where the Quran's divine revelations began and continued for about 12 years. The performer of Hajj does not only reenact Muhammad's ritual, he or she also recalls acts of important people in Muslim history. The rituals performed around the Kaaba reenacts when Prophet Abraham and Ishmael transformed the Kaaba into the sacred place of worship and peace. In spite of some physical hardships, pilgrims who complete the Hajj consider it one of the greatest spiritual experiences of their lives. Many Muslims regard the Hajj as one of the great achievements of civilization because it brings together people from around the world and focuses them upon a single goal. A believer is required to make the pilgrimage at least once in his or her lifetime.
Now, just that picture there, that's the Kaaba. The Kaaba has been torn down and rebuilt many times since the days of Muhammad. This one, I think, is from the 60s. So it's not the building itself that the Muslim faces in their prayers, because that's what the Qibla is for. If you go to one of the mosques around here, you go into the place of prayer, you'll see it's built in such a way that there's a Qibla, and the Qibla is pointing toward that. But what makes that special is the black stone in the corner of the Kaaba, which allegedly, when it came down from heaven, was white. It's turned black because of the sins of men. And what they're doing is thulaf. A certain number of times you're supposed to go around the Kaaba. And obviously during Hajj, the number of people is immense, even though Saudi Arabia now limits it, because there used to be, barely 10 years ago, I remember there was an incident. I don't remember if it was Mecca or Medina, but it was during Hajj. Over 3,000 people trampled to death. And so they've really invested a lot of money, not only into crowd control, but they've built stuff to try to keep that from happening during Hajj. But that's what's going on here as they're walking around. And I've mentioned this story a couple times, but I remember I saw an article, I forget how many years ago it was now, by an Islamic hydrologist who studied the way that people go around the Kaaba and gave instructions as to where to start getting into the flow that will give you the best opportunity of being carried by the crowd closest to the black stone, so you might be able to kiss it. Because that's the really super duper cool thing to be able to do. So here's the inside of the Kaaba. Most Muslims have never seen this. This is the actual inside of the Kaaba. Muslim tradition is that before Muhammad took over Mecca, the Kaaba housed 360 idols. And then he got rid of all of those idols. That's what the Kaaba looks like on the inside. Nothing overly No, astonishing, but that's what it looks like on the inside. So here's the black stone. There's Muhammad Ali looking at the black stone down here on one of his trips to Mecca. But that's what it's contained in right now. And that's literally what the Qibla points to, is the black stone. Not so much the Kaaba, but it's the black stone that makes the Kaaba so important. All right? So that is Hajj. Okay. Let me do this. Next thing I want to cover is 6 articles of belief of Sunni Islam. But before we do that, for just a moment or two, any questions of clarification of what we've covered up to this point? Not stuff about the rest of Islam, but yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Senior Calvin.
I thought the Kaaba was supposedly like the remains of Muhammad. I've always heard something like that.
No, Muhammad and Ishmael allegedly built it. There is no evidence whatsoever and no reason really to believe that Abraham ever was involved with anything like this. But it became the story eventually that Abraham and Ishmael were the constructors of the Kaaba, but it's not where his bones are or anything like that. No. Yeah.
The almsgiving, is that meant for just to Muslim people, or Americanized version they might just give to any?
There's a lot. Well, it's supposed to be given specifically for the Ummah, yeah, but there is a lot of varying opinion as to what you can do with zakat, just helping the poor and stuff like that. So yeah.
The initial intention is for.
Initially, it was. If you're not in a Muslim state, however, there's a lot of disagreement as to what you should do with your zakat. Yeah.
Now, some Muslims, they pray on a piece of stone. What is the origin of that?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay, so some of them, when they're doing the prayer, they have a piece of stone that they put in front of them, and they pray on it. And then you might see some imams and stuff, they have the sign in their forehead.
Well, the only thing I've not seen that, but and I've certainly not seen any of the prayers that I've taken any of my classes to. But there is a text in the Quran that says that godly people have a mark of prostration on their foreheads. That's probably just trying to emulate the Quranic text that makes that reference. So I would imagine it's just a non-commanded but accepted innovation that would allow you to have that mark on your forehead that marks you off along with what the Quran says.
Is it true that they believe it's like some sort of a divine or glorious death if you die at Mecca when you're walking around it? There's something spiritual about that?
Well, I would imagine if you die during Hajj that would be considered actually a blessing. Yeah. I'm not sure the Saudi Arabians appreciate it, but yeah, I certainly would. You expect, it's like going to Jerusalem or something like that. If you die there, well, yeah.
Well, I think if we would, walk around a stone like that, we would say it's idolatry.
Yeah.
How would they look at it? I mean, they are very strong on their monotheism.
Well, the story is that when that Muslims recognize that in the days of Muhammad, all this stuff, including the circumambulation of the Kaaba, it was all pagan. And in fact, the pagans did it naked. But the theory or the story that was developed was that when the Kaaba was originally built, it was built by Abraham and Ishmael as a place of monotheistic worship, and that it degraded over time, and that when Muhammad came, then he repurified it. And so that's how they hold together a transcendent monotheism with the tremendous detestation of idolatry with fairly obviously idolatrous practices, is that it goes back to Abraham and was originally monotheistic in its orientation. In the back.
Did you say that
No, because you can also tell, it's a sort of an interesting way of finding out the relative density of Islamic population in your area. When mosques first start, they're almost always joint Sunni Shia. You can tell you're starting to get a number of Muslims in your area when the mosque splits into the Sunni and the Shia side. So once you have specifically Sunni mosques and specifically Shia mosques, then you know you're getting more of a population in your area. But if it's a single mosque and you have both Sunni and Shia in the same place, then you have a fairly small population there. So they do get along in that context. Yes, sir?
What brought about Muhammad's hatred of the Jews?
That's a long story. But fundamentally, that probably derives, if we accept the Islamic stories concerning Muhammad's military campaigns, and especially the Battle of the Trench, Battle of Badr, Battle of Uhud, in the fact that clearly in the Quran, he did attempt to get Jews and Christians to accept him as a prophet and to see him as a continuation of their own belief. Once it became clear that they were not going to accept him in that way, and certain Jewish tribes in Medina refused to fight in defense of Medina against the Meccans. And then after the battle, Muhammad and the Muslims turned on them and destroyed them. That would be where the origin of those who earn God's wrath come from. Obviously, there's been lots of things since the days of Muhammad that have exacerbated that, but at least in the story of Muhammad, that would probably be the primary origin of that. One more, then we'll take our break. Yes, sir. Yeah?
Sounds like you looked at the video, 10% of Muslims make the pilgrimage.
Yes.
Which means 90% do not. So what is supposedly a gain, and what are the consequences of not making the pilgrimage?
Well, the idea has always been that if you have the funds and the health, and sort of over time, it sort of became an unspoken, and if you're close enough to really even do it. I mean, because when you think about it, if you were a Muslim in the United States in the late 1800s, I mean, you're talking about months and months of travel and everything else. What's really ironic is that someone ran the numbers recently, and given the number of people that the Saudi Arabians allow in, given the number of Muslims in the world, the fifth pillar can no longer be fulfilled. There's not enough openings, even if they wanted to. So in essence, the fifth pillar is no longer functional. And so it's sort of become a pilgrimage of desire. It's sort of a super spiritual thing to get to do, but you sort of have to have the connections. And so it's sort of morphing over time, which let me make just one statement here and then we'll take our break, which leads me to one of the most amazing things. Some Christians come up with some amazing arguments against Islam that are just... But there's one gentleman who I will not name because he has lived here in Southern California, may still, I don't know where he is right now, but who's written a couple books on the subject of Islam, who has actually argued that one of the most effective ways of dealing with Islam, especially Islam as a threatening political system, would be to nuke the Kaaba. Use a nuclear weapon to destroy the Kaaba. And he has seriously suggested that this would be effective because you're taking out one of the pillars of Islam, you destroy the Islamic religion. When I first heard it, I couldn't believe anybody had actually suggested it. And then when somebody told me who it was, no way. Well, it was. Believe you me, given that the fifth pillar is already primarily spiritualized, not only would that not destroy the Islamic faith, it would unite the world's Muslims in a way that nothing else ever could. So aside from it being just absurd for any Christian to think about the mass destruction of nuking a religious site as if that was somehow going to do something, it would have the exact opposite effect It would unite them. It would unite the Sunnis and the Shias in a way that nothing else ever could. So be careful what you run into. There is wild stuff out there. There is really, really wild stuff out there. So we're going to take a break before we hit the 6 articles of belief of Sunni Islam, and I'm going way too slow, so I'm going to have to start talking faster. That'll help to keep you awake.